Hello, a very good morning to you. There's a new warning that has now become the norm for children as young as 9 to run drugs for gangs in England. A report by the Commission on Young Lives found that they're getting lured into drug dealing and violence, with thousands of young people groomed, harmed and even killed. The Commission is now calling on the government to treat the exploitation of children as seriously as it does terrorism, as our Home Editor, Jason Farrell, reports.
Bursting with life, Leah died because of one bad decision, but also from what's been described today as a national problem hidden in plain sight. The first Leah's mum realised it was when medics were trying to resuscitate her daughter.
I knew as soon as I got there was police, there was other nurses around, and I knew just by their reaction it wasn't good. They had their heads down.
Leah had overdosed on MDMA whilst out with friends. She lived here in Northallerton, Rishi Sunak's constituency, which doesn't look like it has a youth drug problem, but does, and it's often children who are selling the drugs. Tammy's teenage son supplied the MDMA that killed Leah. She doesn't want us to give his name, but he got sucked into county lines dealing from the age of 14, and Tammy says for 3 years she couldn't get support to get him out.
3 days before Leah died, the police were in my house. I was asking for help. And if something would have happened those 3 days, or when he was 14, he should not have gone to jail, and Leah would be here.
This is exactly the problem identified by today's report from the Commission on Young Lives.
One of the things we got told time and time again was that, when a parent found the horrific burner phone in a child's bedroom, or a knife, or some cash, they'd ring up social services or they'd ring up the police, but no one could help them.
Leah's mum thinks people who deal to teenagers should get tougher sentences, but recognises the boy who supplied Leah's drugs was himself exploited.
He was groomed. He was groomed to do this. I don't think he's a horrible person.
Do you think he's a victim?
Yeah, 100%.
A report by the Commission on Young Lives today recommended a sure start for teenagers, bringing support and intervention together in local hubs, backed up by what it calls an army of youth workers, and schools remaining open during school holidays and weekends as safe places for children, along with an additional £1 billion investment to combat teenage mental health problems, with money raised from social media companies.
It used to be the case you'd have 11, 12, 13-year-olds who were running, delivering the drugs. Now that's going down 9, 10, 11. But also where you've got young teenagers, 13, 14, actually heading up county lines, delivering drugs across the country, running a business here in a very ruthless way.
Previously, we've met gangs running county lines, looking to exploit children.
This is what I give to the people and the little kids. They all go out for me.
And the report says with the cost of living crisis, more children are easy prey. Research by the YMCA published earlier this year found across the country the annual spend on child services has fallen by 74% in the last decade. And what this report is calling for is more investment. Be it in the inner cities or the Yorkshire countryside, reversing those trends won't be easy.
It's not just about let's throw this money here. It's about how we're going to do it, who's going to be trained on it, and where are they going to get the social workers and the youth workers, because nobody wants to come into health and social care at the minute.
The report argues that investing in preventing children from being exploited in the long term would save huge costs within the criminal justice system, as well as preventing heartache for families. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
Well, the Policing Minister, Chris Philp, joins me now. A very good morning to you. Thanks so much for coming in.
Good morning.
Let's just start with that report. Children as young as 9 running drugs for gangs. Thousands of young people in England being groomed, harmed or even killed. How has this been allowed to happen and get worse under your watch?
Well, I've been in the job for about a week. This is a matter that's of deep concern. It has been for some years. So in 2019, 3 years ago, a whole initiative was launched to tackle this county lines problem, whereas your report really powerfully set out children, very young children often, are being groomed and exploited. There are 4 priority areas where money has been invested. That's London, Greater Manchester, Merseyside, and the West Midlands in particular. £145 million was put against this task. And as a result of that, 2,400 county lines operations have been dismantled, and there have been 8,000 arrests. So a huge amount of work has been done here. There's a coordination centre to make sure that we're coordinating nationally, because obviously these county lines, by their very nature, cross police force areas. For example, you might have a gang in London, for instance, running drugs down to the south coast, to coastal communities. So it runs across police force boundaries. That's why the coordination is so important. So there's a lot of work going on here over the last 3 years in particular, both with money and with police officer resource, that is delivering results. Those 8,000 arrests are making a real difference, but there clearly is a lot more work to do.
Well, yes, I mean, you say results, but these are startling facts that children that young are getting involved and caught up in these gangs. And the report says that there are already huge stresses on overstretched services. They suggest that any return to austerity would be a gift to those who exploit children. And yet we have warnings, of course, from the Chancellor that spending cuts are needed to balance the book. So will the necessary budgets be protected in this spending review?
Well, obviously, we'll need to wait and see what the Chancellor says on the 17th of November. But I would expect, as the Chancellor makes his decisions in the coming weeks, that critical services will get protected. That's certainly a case I'll be making. But we'll need to wait and see what the Chancellor sets out in his statement in a couple of weeks' time. OK,
what about the other suggestions? The report says that young people and their families should be helped out of poverty, beginning with the uprating of family benefits in line with inflation, ending the 2-child benefit cap and the extension of free school meals to all families receiving universal credit. Given the severity of the situation, will the government commit to that? Well, let's just think about the action that's been taken already to help families with children and without, particularly on lower incomes. So we've had this energy crisis. Families on lower incomes this year are receiving £1,200 in help. Some of that money is being received this month as we speak. The energy price guarantee is protecting families from bills that could have been as high as £5,000 or £6,000. OK, but what about these specific cases that the report is asking for?
And when it comes to people on lower incomes, you know, we've significantly increased the minimum wage. It's gone from £5.93 an hour under Labour up to £9.50 now. We've lifted all the tax thresholds, so people on lower earnings pay no income tax and no national insurance whatsoever. So a huge range of measures, particularly designed to help people on lower incomes.
And I'm sure those things are helpful, but what the report is calling for an uprating of family benefits in line with inflation, ending the 2-child benefit cap and the extension of free school meals to all families receiving universal credit. You can't guarantee that will happen.
Well, I can't, because the Chancellor obviously is going to set out his plans on November 17th. He'll have heard that, I'm sure, along with other ideas other people are putting forward as well. And, you know, we'll find out in a couple of weeks what his plans are.
Well, we will indeed, and there's a lot of focus on that. And I want to talk about the economy a little bit, because your old boss, Liz Truss, you worked in the Treasury under her, she said that a recession wasn't inevitable, but we're now looking at the longest recession in a century. And the decisions that you made are partly to blame for that, aren't they?
Well, I think countries around the world are facing enormous economic challenges. It's not just this country, as the Bank of England said yesterday. The European Central Bank have made similar comments. JP Morgan has said the United States of America, the US, has similar challenges. The IMF said 1/3 of global economies are going to be going into recession. So this is a global phenomenon. We're not immune to that.
But the UK has a specific problem, doesn't it? And in fact, asked about whether this meltdown was down to global factors yesterday, the Bank of England Governor, Andrew Bailey, said, I don't really think that's the case. He also has said that he believed that the mini-budget had damaged the UK's standing internationally. You were in the room when the decisions were made about the mini-budget. He's kind of blaming you, isn't he?
Well, the decisions around the mini-budget were made by the former Chancellor and the former
You were in the
Prime Minister.
Treasury team.
Yeah, I was on the Treasury team, that's right. But the decisions, as you would expect, were made by the Chancellor, the previous Chancellor and the previous Prime Minister, who are no longer in post. If you look at the movements to the currency and to government bonds that happened around that time, the negative moves that happened 4 or 5 weeks ago, those numbers have now returned pretty much to the levels they were before. What we now need to do is make sure that we're on an even keel. The new Chancellor is doing that already. And the new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, is someone who successfully guided our economy through COVID. We came through COVID. We now have the lowest unemployment we've had for 48 years.
That's going to go up, though, according to the Bank of England's projections.
But let's think about where we're starting from. We've got the lowest unemployment for 48 years because Rishi Sunak, as Chancellor, guided us through COVID, and I think he'll guide us through this crisis very well. Also, in terms of GDP growth, last year, not just last year, but also this year, according to the IMF, the UK had the highest GDP growth in the G7, not just last year, but this year as well. So we are starting from a good position, but in common with Western economies, developed economies around the world, there are challenges, but we can meet them.
But a recession for 8 quarters, whatever position you start in, that's a pretty bad place to end up. And Andrew Bailey did say that we were hours from financial meltdown following the mini-budget. Are you quite embarrassed to have been involved in that? Do you have any regrets? Do you feel like you want to apologise?
Well, I think Liz Truss has already apologised, and she's obviously
would you
no longer.
like to?
Well, I say the decisions. Well, although I am, along with other people, was a minister in that government at the time, those decisions were taken principally by the former Prime Minister, to a lesser extent by the former Chancellor, and she has apologised for that, and then neither of them are in office any longer. What I think we're doing now, what Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak are doing, is making sure the country is on an even keel, and in the same way that Rishi guided our economy very successfully through COVID, as I said, we've got the lowest unemployment for 48 years, an incredible achievement. It's half the level that Labour left behind. I think he'll do the same thing through this global crisis that we're entering. And if you think about inflation, that is a global crisis. Eurozone inflation is 10%. In Germany, it's 12%. In Holland, it's 14%. So these are global problems.
OK, let's talk about the UK. You talk about the Chancellor being all about sound public finances. We know that cuts are on the way. There are reports this morning that the new nuclear plant in Suffolk, Sizewell C, is under review. Can you confirm that that's the case?
No, I'm afraid I don't know anything about whether that is or is not under consideration. My job in the Home Office is looking after policing. So I can't comment on that at all. I really just don't know. We'll find out on November 17th what the plans are.
OK, well, a quick question then about capital gains tax. The Telegraph reporting of possible changes. Any indication of the direction they might be looking in?
I'm afraid I just don't know. The Treasury will be making their plans. I don't know what those are, and we'll just have to wait and see what gets announced on the 17th. OK,
well, let's stick to your brief, which is, of course, policing, as you say. Wednesday's damning report found evidence of poor decision-making in police vetting, inconsistent handling of misconduct cases. Your 2019 manifesto set targets, 20,000 police recruitment. Cutting corners to meet those targets?
No, I don't think so. We're on track to meet that target, by the way. We've hired 15,000 of the 20,000, and we're on track to deliver all 20,000 extra police by March of next year, by sort of 4 or 5 months' time. £3.5 billion extra was provided to police forces over that period, the 2019 to 2022 period, when those officers were being recruited, to pay not just for their additional salaries, but also for the support and the infrastructure, including vetting that goes around that, which makes it particularly sort of disappointing that these very serious failings were identified by the inspector's report published a day or two ago. There were 43 recommendations in that report. 3 of those were for the Home Office that we will implement pretty much immediately, or certainly urgently. The other 40 recommendations were for police forces. The NPCC chief, Martin Hewitt, has said they will act on all of those. That is my expectation as police minister. I'm going to work with police to make sure those are implemented as quickly as possible.
OK, let's talk about Manston, shall we? The processing centre in Kent. Can we get an update on the number of people that are in that processing centre now? How many are there and how many have been moved out?
Well, so over 1,000 people have been moved out in the last week or so a substantial number. Since the beginning of September, when the current Home Secretary took office, I think a total of 9,000 people, obviously there's people coming in and out the whole time, 9,000 people have left. I think numbers have very substantially reduced in the course of the last week. And they're investing in creating more facilities there and better facilities to address some of the concerns that have been raised.
But where are they gone? I mean, we've got reports of a second group of migrants left stranded at Victoria Coach Station.
Well, they've mostly gone to hotels. There are about 4,500 extra hotels have been procured.
But what about these people that have been stranded at Victoria Coach Station?
Yeah, so
Why has that happened?
There were 2 groups of people, and what I've been told by the people on the immigration side of the Home Office is that both groups of people had told immigration officials at Manston they had addresses to go to, so friends and family, Obviously, that turned out subsequently not to be the case, but the information that Home Office officials had understood was they had places to go to, because many of the people do have friends and family in the UK already.
So this was a mistake?
Yeah, well, clearly that understanding was not accurate. Quite how that misunderstanding arose, maybe it was lost in translation, I don't know. But clearly they have now all been looked after. OK,
as a former immigration compliance minister, do you accept that Manston is not legally compliant now?
I'm not sure I do accept that. Significant improvements have been made recently. We had similar challenges over the Napier site in Folkestone, and we made improvements there to make it compliant. So, but we should keep in mind that there is a huge challenge we've got here. About 40,000 people so far have illegally entered the UK so far this year on small boats. And that is a huge operational challenge. It's very, very hard to deal with that. Now, these journeys are totally unnecessary because France, obviously, is a safe country with a well-functioning asylum system. These journeys don't need to be made. No one is fleeing war in France.
Okay.
These journeys should not be getting made in the first place.
Well, many people would argue they need more legal routes to come in, and
let's
many
talk
of
about
these are
that.
asylum seekers.
That's right. So first of all, France has a well-functioning asylum system. Secondly, the predominant nationality, the largest single nationality is Albanian. Albania is a safe and civilised country. You don't need to leave Albania for your safety. It's a safe country. In terms of safe and legal routes, we have a lot of safe and legal routes. Let me give you a couple of examples. We've taken
Very briefly,
150,000 Ukrainians, 20,000 Syrians when there was the war there, 23,000 Afghans, over 100,000 people from Hong Kong fleeing the Chinese Communist Party. We have a lot of safe and legal routes. We've been very generous to people who are in genuine need, the groups I've just mentioned being prime examples of that. What we can't accept, and frankly can't even handle operationally, because the numbers are so large, are people making these dangerous and unnecessary journeys across the Channel from France, a safe country. And that is why quite radical action is needed legislatively to make sure that our international treaty obligations aren't being domestically interpreted or applied in a way that makes it impossible to run our immigration system.
Lots
that
of
is happening
arguments
at the moment.
that we will have to have another time, or conversation to have another time, but I do want to just come back to this question of whether or not Manston is legally compliant. Robert Jenrick, your colleague, told Sky News this week he expected Manston to be returned to a well-functioning and legally compliant site very rapidly.
That's
the
right.
implication being that it's not currently legally compliant.
Well, a lot of changes have been made in the course of this week. I think Robert has been down there at least once and possibly twice. I think he's going down again on Sunday. So significant changes and improvements have been made.
So how soon will it be before it's legally compliant?
Well, I don't accept the premise that it's not legally compliant today. A lot of changes have been made, even in the last few days, since you spoke to Robert on this chair, I think, a few days ago.
Yeah, Wednesday night, I think it was. OK. Well, Christopher, we're out of time, but thanks very much indeed for coming in. Thank you. So let's take a look now at the front pages of the morning papers. This will hurt. That's on the front of the Metro after the big Bank of England rates rise and the expectation of a long recession to come. Similar sentiments in the Express, which says there are stormy times ahead. The Eye describes what's to come as a toxic shock for millions of people as the country's economy as a whole. And The Times tells us the rise is aimed at heading off the worrying increase in inflation that we've been seeing in recent months. And The Financial Times says that despite the latest rise, the bank doesn't think that future rises will be as high as the markets have feared. So that's the front pages of the morning's newspapers. Let's now tell you what's still to come here on this show. I'm going to be speaking to Selene Saxby, who's the MP who has raised concerns with the Home Office at plans to house asylum seekers in hotels in her constituency. We'll speak to an expert in infectious disease about the case of a British man who's thought to have had COVID longer than anybody else and survived. And in the next hour, I'll be joined by Jonathan Reynolds, the Shadow Business Secretary. So lots to come here on the show. Meanwhile, though, as we've been telling you, the government is facing a series of challenges over the way that it's dealing with asylum seekers arriving in the UK, from claims of the rape of children and people being kept in appalling conditions to criticism over the Home Secretary's visit to Manston and Dover. Well, Matthew Thompson is at the Manston Immigration Centre for us this morning. So just yesterday, of course, we saw the Home Secretary visit there, Matthew.
We certainly did, and she didn't take any questions from journalists. She arrived in a military helicopter, a Chinook, that took her the mere 15 miles from Dover to here at Manston. And that raised a few eyebrows, why she would go to those lengths. Certainly a number of immigration charities have criticised her for doing that on board a military helicopter, saying that it looked as if she was leaning into her controversial words the other day about an invasion on the coast. But the Home Office is very strongly briefing that she took that helicopter journey because she was actually flying over the coastline to observe some of the work that the Border Force is doing to protect the coastline and stop or tackle these small boat crossings. Because there were no questions asked to the Home Secretary when she was here, we got a handout of her comments, and what she promised to do was improve some of the services here, medical services, bedding, things like that. And also the government confirming that the latest numbers, they say, are around 2,700 left in the centre behind me. That's down from a peak of around 4,000. But let's bear in mind that it was only ever intended to be set up for some 1,600 migrants. And even then, for them only to be here for 24 hours. There are stories of migrants having spent weeks in the camp behind me. And that's what leads us to this legally contentious territory you were just discussing with the Minister a moment ago. Two charities now, Detention Action and Bail for Immigration Detainees, have written pre-action letters to the Home Office warning that the detention of people in camps like this, particularly Manston, for more than 24 hours is, they say, illegal. The Home Office has said that it will respond to those in due course. And it also comes, as we've heard now, 2 coachloads, the Minister confirming there, of migrants seem to have been abandoned in the middle of the street at Victoria Coach Station in London, many of them having to spend the night sleeping on the streets. And the Home Office now says, as Chris Philp was just telling you, that that's because there was a misunderstanding, that these people had told the Home Office that they had people to stay with and people to collect them. But I think what it shows you is still the sense of crisis that's engulfing the centre here at Manston, even as the government assures us it's doing everything in its power to get on top of the situation.
OK, Matthew, thanks very much indeed. Now, China's President Xi Jinping has told the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz their two countries should work together during times of turmoil. The leaders met in Beijing this morning. He's the first Western leader to visit the country since the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, let's bring in our Asia correspondent, Helen Smith, who's in the Chinese capital for us now. So, Helen, what's the reaction been then to this visit?
Well, I think Olaf Scholz is sending a very, very clear message by coming here to Beijing today. And his message unequivocally is that an isolated China is really no good for anyone. He could not have picked a more beautiful day to come here. It is absolutely stunning. The sky is blue. The sun is shining. The German flags have been flying next to the Chinese flags in Tiananmen Square, just across the way where the leaders are meeting. But be under no illusion, this has been an extremely tricky visit, both logistically and politically. Logistically, China is still in the midst of its zero COVID agenda. The German delegation have had to be bubbled. They can't stay the night. Everyone who's coming into contact with them has have to be quarantined afterwards. And politically as well. Remember, this comes just after the pandemic. He is the first leader from the G7 from Europe to come since the pandemic, a time where this country has been increasingly isolated. And it also comes just after the 20th Party Congress here in China, where Xi's power, President Xi was given an unprecedented third term, his power very much consolidated, an increasingly sort of autocratic ruling system here. And it comes at a time where tensions between China and the West have been very, very high. So it is complex in that context. On the agenda will absolutely be the war in Ukraine. China's still an incredibly powerful voice in that dynamic. It hasn't equivocally condemned or sort of supported the war in Ukraine, but its position could be extremely important to the West. And also trade, the kind of financial and economic interlinking between Germany and China that runs very, very deep. And Germany certainly burned by the sudden sanctions on Russia and what that's the implications that's caused sort of economically across Europe. So many, many important issues on the agenda. But I think importantly, what Olaf Scholz is trying to sort of say in the symbolism of this visit is that China is an important player geopolitically, economically, and negotiating with China, being seen to work with China, will be more important, more valuable than allowing it to become increasingly more isolated.
Helen Ann, thanks very much indeed. Now, the former Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan has had surgery after being shot at a protest march. One person has been arrested. His colleagues have claimed the attack was an attempted assassination and highlights concerns about political instability in the country. Our Asia correspondent Cordelia Lynch was at the scene of the shooting and had spoken to Mr. Khan shortly before the incident.
The only terrorist threat for us is the government and their handlers.
Does it worry you, the prospect of violence?
Well, I'm confident that, and I've been on the road for 6 months now. What I've seen, I'm confident that I will be able to direct it through elections. The government has no choice but to hold elections, sooner or later, and I think it's only a matter of time.
Twitter is expected to start mass layoffs today as the company's new boss, Elon Musk, moves to cut costs. Staff were told not to come into the social media giant's offices this morning. They'll receive an email later letting them know if they still have a job. Our US correspondent Martha Kellner has the latest.
I was outside the Twitter headquarters in San Francisco last week when it was confirmed that Elon Musk had completed the takeover of the company. Speaking to staff there, this is what they were fearing. And in many, if not all cases, this is what they were expecting, that there would be mass layoffs at the organisation. And it seems that that is now coming to pass. This memo sent to staff this evening saying, "Team, in an effort to place Twitter on a healthy path, we will go through the difficult process of reducing our global workforce. This action is unfortunately necessary to ensure the company's success moving forward." Now, this memo outlines exactly what will happen. It tells staff that at 9 a.m. local time in San Francisco, so that's 4 p.m. UK time, staff will receive an email. If their position is to remain intact, if there's to be no change to their job, they'll receive that email through their official Twitter email account. If they're to lose their job, they'll receive that email through their personal account. This continues an incredibly controversial first week in charge for Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, now in charge of one of the world's most influential communication platforms. You also have speculation about what's going to happen with content moderation and will there be a return for the former president Donald Trump to Twitter. But first and foremost, you have this wait for staff, around 7,500 Twitter staff, not sure whether they will still be in a job after 9 a.m. local time tomorrow.
Also making the news this morning, the Russian ambassador to the UK has dismissed claims that his country will use nuclear weapons in Ukraine in an interview with Sky News. However, Andrei Kelin has suggested that the Kremlin has evidence that Britain was behind a drone attack on Russia's Black Sea fleet in Crimea and now risks escalating the situation.
We perfectly know about participation of British specialists in training, preparation and execution of plans against the Russian infrastructure and the Russian fleet in Black Sea.
The King will today host a reception at Buckingham Palace ahead of the COP27 climate summit in Egypt. His Majesty will welcome more than 200 international business leaders, marking the end of the UK's presidency of the conference. Downing Street says Rishi Sunak has not been in office long enough for the logistics to be arranged for the monarch to attend COP27. The Prince and Princess of Wales were upstaged by a young fan in North Yorkshire. From the moment they arrived at a community hub in Scarborough, the youngster was determined to meet them.
And I think for Catherine and I, the sort of legacy of today, bringing people together and collaborating.
Well, yesterday the couple were visiting a project called The Street, which provides mental health support to youngsters in the town. It's one of the organisations funded by the couple's own charity foundation. Now, earlier I spoke to Policing Minister Chris Philp and asked him about reports of asylum seekers left stranded, wandering the streets of London without any onward destination. So this is what he told me.
What I've been told by the people on the immigration side of the Home Office is that both groups of people had told immigration officials at Manston they had addresses to go to, so friends and family. Obviously, that turned out subsequently not to be the case, but the information that Home Office officials had understood was they had places to go to, because many of the people do have friends and family in the UK already.
So this was a mistake?
Yeah, well, clearly that understanding was not accurate. Quite how that misunderstanding arose, maybe it was lost in translation, I don't know. But clearly they have now all been looked after.
Well, our political correspondent Rob Powell is here with me in the studio. Morning to you. Still a lot of questions over this processing centre in Kent, Manston. How much have we learnt this morning from the Minister about what's going on there?
Maybe a little bit. He did say over 1,000 people have been moved out of Manston this week. Sort of suggested as well that maybe it was operating even today in a legal manner. Maybe it was compliant legally again, today after Robert Jenrick, his colleague in the Home Office, suggested a couple of days ago that it wasn't. In terms of where people are going, though, when they're being taken from Manston, he said, yes, mainly hotels, but we've had this case, or two cases, in fact, of groups of people being left at a train station in central London with no kind of idea of where they were going. Now, what Chris Philp suggested was that actually those people had told Home Office officials at Manston that they had people to stay with, and so sort of suggesting that actually they had said that they would be fine when they got to London. And said that maybe there was a misunderstanding there, maybe there was something that got lost in translation. Thought it was interesting as well, the exchange on the economy that you had with him. Chris Philp was someone who was in the Treasury, he was Chief Secretary to the Treasury, essentially the Chancellor's deputy under Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss, so was pretty instrumental and right in the middle of that disastrous mini-budget that we learnt yesterday from the Bank of England governor, almost took the country to financial meltdown. Not really wanting to acknowledge any regrets or apologise, but quite forcefully dumping all of the blame at the former Prime Minister and the former Chancellor, saying that it was them that made the decisions, that they are no longer in post, and actually the economy has recovered since they'd left as well. So a large amount of blame shifting going on there, given he was out on the airwaves, 5 weeks ago, defending that economic plan. Clearly, though, as policing minister and as a Home Office minister, with everything you were discussing with him there, he has substantial new challenges on his plate now, though.
Absolutely, and he said he had great faith in Rishi Sunak to guide us through. Rob, for the moment, thanks very much indeed. So, several Conservative MPs have criticised the Home Office over its plans to deal with asylum seekers. Amongst them is Member of Parliament for North Devon, Selene Saxby, who's raised some concerns and suggestions that people will be housed in hotels in her constituency. And we can speak now to Selene Saxby. So, very good morning to you. Thanks so much for talking to us. So, tell us a little bit about your concerns. Am I right in saying you don't want migrants to stay in hotels in North Devon?
Good morning. No, that's not the case at all. The council are very happy to help the Home Office as needed. The situation is that the hotel, which does now have asylum seekers in Ilfracombe, was deemed 2 weeks ago by the Home Office to not be a suitable place for asylum seekers to go. And then as of darkness 36 hours ago, it was filled up without any notification or further discussion with the council or myself. And I think the concerns is why was it not suitable 2 weeks ago, and it is now, both for the local community but also for those people who are seeking asylum.
What makes it an unsuitable place for them to go?
So originally this was a hotel that was trading, and Ilfracombe is a lovely tourism destination, and so it's taken out 100 beds out of that local economy, and the whole system seems to be slightly backwards, that the hotels volunteer themselves because they can make more money from the Home Office than actually running as a hotel. But it damages the whole ecosystem of the tourism business in Ilfracombe by taking out that many visitors in the run up to Christmas. So that was the first concern. And then Ilfracombe is a very remote, beautiful coastal location. But we are aware it's a long way from a hospital. It doesn't have a train station. And so some of those facilities that actually people may need when they're seeking asylum are not actually available there. And the council and myself felt that a larger conurbation nearby, if we were going to be helping, would be a better place for those people to go.
Well, we have heard, haven't we, in the last couple of days, council leaders in Kent writing to the Home Secretary, raising their concerns. They say the county's at breaking point. They've warned that secondary schools in 2 areas have got no places for certain year groups because of the sudden arrival of so many refugee children, for example. So it's not fair, is it, to place a heavy burden on a few select areas? It needs to be spread more broadly, and including places potentially like Ilfracombe.
It certainly needs to be spread more broadly, but we have bigger towns in North Devon than Ilfracombe that would be much better placed to assist. And I think where the whole process seems to be going wrong is that councils aren't being involved in these decisions, and the local councils are well placed to know where we can accommodate people safely and securely, and that will work with their local communities. And that doesn't seem to be happening at all. Councils are just being completely cut out of the decision-making process and then left to sort it out themselves, because Ilfracombe also doesn't have that many school places to be able to open up its doors if we need to other families.
So are there hotels that would be suitable in your area that you'd be happy to suggest?
I think we'd need to look at whether it was hotels or whether there are other types of accommodation, as obviously we do have military bases up there as well. And I think these are the conversations that just haven't happened, that this has just been railroaded. And the concern is very much, if this one wasn't suitable 2 weeks ago, why is it now? And who is taking these decisions?
So what does that say, do you think, about the handling of this situation, the situation at Manston?
I think it's gravely concerning. Obviously, there does seem to be a link between the arrival of people in my constituency and what's going on in Manston. And it does seem some of these decisions may have been more rushed than perhaps would have been appropriate for everybody involved.
What do you think the right solution should be now?
I'd very much like to see the Home Office working far more closely with local communities to find suitable accommodation for these people, and also for more work to be going on to actually stop so many people arriving on our shores.
Are you satisfied with Suella Braverman's handling of this migrant situation?
I think this situation predates Suella. It's obviously been going on and growing in magnitude for a very long time, and we do need to find better solutions than we have at the present time.
OK, well, Selene Saxby, we appreciate your time this morning. Thanks very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, let's talk about this issue a little bit further. Our next guest has worked under 3 Home Secretaries and 5 immigration ministers in his role as Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration. He joins me now. It's John Vine, the UK's first independent Inspector of Borders and Immigration. Thanks very much indeed for talking to us here this morning. First of all, I wondered if you were able to hear Selene Saxby's concerns there, MP for North Devon, concerned about a lack of communication and migrants being moved into a hotel that she believed was unsuitable in her constituency. What do you make of what she had to say?
Well, her last reply was saying that this has been building for some time, and for years we've been talking about the increasing number of people who are arriving in Britain in small boats, and a growing backlog of asylum cases. So it beggars belief that the Home Office hasn't been able to get their act together to make proper provision for the care of people who arrive, and also have well tried and tested systems in place for redistributing people to good accommodation. And the other thing that I find quite surprising, going back to the incidents of people sort of arriving at Victoria Station in London with nowhere to go, whatever the reason for that is, the Home Office has an obligation to know where people are. I mean, these people have arrived here, made a claim for asylum. The Home Office should be checking their identity when they arrive to establish exactly who they are. And they should know which addresses they're going to and where they can be reached. And so that's just an aspect that seems to have been lost in this debate.
So how serious would you say the situation was? Would you say there's a real crisis in the asylum system? How bad do you think it is?
Well, I mean, I don't really have to comment. I think a politician, was it the minister herself, said that the system was broken. I don't think phrases like that are very helpful, actually. But it seems that the system is completely overwhelmed at the moment. So what we have is, a daily arrival of people because law enforcement doesn't seem to be able to stop people arriving in boats. And there are very good reasons for that. Once people are at sea, it's a real problem because, you can't do a great deal about it. They're in danger because they're afloat, in the English Channel. But there's a massive backlog in asylum cases. There's 100,000 backlog in the processing of these asylum claims. And I think the Home Office needs to look at, their system in place to see whether it can be made more efficient, that can be more productive. It seems that the system is just creaking as far as I can see.
Yeah, what's your understanding of why it is taking longer to process these migrants' asylum claims? How hard is it to determine which ones are genuine, which people are actually economic migrants? Is it understandable that it's taking longer?
Yes, it's always difficult because in every migration flow, there are people who are fleeing persecution, who have got a very good case, or war zones, very good case for asylum. And there are people who are economic migrants, and there are sometimes people who are fleeing because they've been criminals in their country or they've been foreign fighters. So there's a real important job for the Home Office to try and discover who they are and then to decide on their asylum claims, because most of them, the vast majority, claim asylum to remain in the UK. And every country has to do this. But we seem to be making it a bureaucratic nightmare. This has happened before. I mean, when I was appointed the Chief Inspector, there was a backlog of asylum claims of nearly 500,000. This was back in 2009. And, there were similar problems with bureaucracy, slowness. I think they need to look at the number of caseworkers they have doing this work. They need to quality assure the decisions that they're taking. And the whole process needs to be looked at end to end.
And of course, it raises the issue of how the people waiting for those answers are being housed while they wait for the decisions. When you were independent Chief Inspector, you talked about unnecessarily unpleasant treatment of asylum seekers. From what's been reported in recent days and weeks, has that changed at all, the treatment of asylum seekers, do you think?
Well, I'm not able to examine, I'm not able to ask the Home Office for data to examine and inspect, but there is an independent Chief Inspector now, and he could do that. And I think, perhaps it's time for him to look at this issue again. I mean, what I fear is that the staff really aren't led well, and they're not assured that if they make difficult decisions, they'll be supported by their senior managers. That is a gut feeling I have about what might be happening. And also, I think it's just become much more of a bureaucratic process, and we need to speed it up. Some of these decisions are going to be relatively straightforward. Very often the asylum and refugee agencies say that the majority, I think it's about 70% approval for applicants in the UK at the moment. That's quite a different figure from most European countries. So I think the Home Office needs to assure itself that, those decisions are being taken speedily. And of course, there is a cost. There's a cost to the public purse of having people, waiting for years and years and years. Way back in 2009, people were waiting many, many years for a decision, which is very stressful for applicants, but also is very costly to the public purse.
Well, John Vine, very interesting to get your take on the situation. We really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for talking to us here this morning.
Thank you.
Let me just bring you some breaking news just in. The Northern Ireland Secretary has confirmed an Assembly election will not take place in December. Chris Heaton-Harris says he had valuable conversations with people across Northern Ireland, including business and community representatives. He said, "I've listened to their sincere concerns about the impact and cost of an election at this time." Mr Heaton-Harris also added that he will make a statement in Parliament to lay out the next step. So the Northern Ireland Secretary there confirming an Assembly election there will not take place in December. More details to follow in his statement. Now, Sky News has learnt that FIFA has written to all 32 nations taking part in the World Cup this month, urging them to ignore any political controversies and focus exclusively on football. Its call comes amid growing criticism over Qatar's stance on same-sex relationships, its human rights record and its treatment of migrant workers. Well, the letter from FIFA's president, Gianni Infantino, says, "Please, let's now focus on the football. We know that football doesn't live in a vacuum, and we are equally aware that there are many challenges and difficulties of a political nature all around the world. But please do not allow football to be dragged into every ideological or political battle that exists." So let's bring in our sports presenter, Jackie Bell-Trow. So, Jackie, so much controversy over Qatar hosting this football tournament, and interesting to see this letter going out as well.
Yes, absolutely. It's almost like he's not really reading the room, Infantino, the FIFA president. I mean, a few weeks ago, Qatar did come out and say, all fans are welcome here, even gay fans are welcome for the World Cup. But it remains, it's illegal to be gay in Qatar, and those laws remain, they say, for cultural reasons. Now, the captains of several countries are going to be wearing special armbands for the World Cup, including England, Germany, France. It is an armband, it's a One Love armband, it's multicoloured, and it symbolises the fight against discrimination. And the England captain, as we see in these pictures, Harry Kane, says there's only so much players can do, but wearing the armband on the biggest football stage will have an impact because the television audiences are so huge. Now, Denmark's shirt manufacturer, Hummel, do not want to be associated with this World Cup. You will struggle to see a logo on their shirt because the shirts are red and they have made the logos red just for this tournament. They just absolutely don't want to be associated with it. Obviously, anti-LGBT laws, people speaking out about that has been the main topic, but also workers' rights, the number of people who died when they were building the stadia for this World Cup. What kind of conditions did they work in? All the reports say they were awful conditions. The players do have a voice. They have been speaking out on a number of topics on their social media. Their following is huge, obviously. Harry Kane, 13.2 million followers on Instagram. But you do know that once the football gets started, the focus will be on football. Infantino will get his wish. So now is the time to make a point.
A British man who had COVID for 411 days is thought to have had the virus longer than anyone else and survived. Experts at Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital found that he had an early variant of the original strain. So let's talk about this a little bit more. Joining me now is Dr. Bharat Pankania, an expert in infectious disease. Very good morning to you. 411 days testing positive. Have you ever heard anything like this before?
It's not impossible. It's unusual, but not impossible. And by the way, this is clear. This is good biology in action. So this person was immune suppressed. And as a result of being immune suppressed, they had this persistence of infection. And I have seen many of these incidents in, for example, TB. When they are immune suppressed, the infection carries on without doing much damage to the lungs, but it can still be there. So it is possible biologically.
And there's no medicine to cure COVID per se, is there? So what kind of treatment did he receive and how much difference did that make?
So he was given the whole armamentum, antivirals, antibodies, and what has worked is that he had the original old version of the virus against which the antibodies made in the laboratory worked, and eventually he was cured. So the important point here is if we imagine that the spikes on the virus are the nuts and the antibodies are the spanners, then if the nuts change shape, the spanners will not fit and work. So the new variants that we have, Omicron, etc., they are not attacked properly by the antibodies that we have made, and they are therefore not working anymore. So we would have to go back to the laboratory and make a version of antibodies that work against the circulating Omicron, for example.
And are treatments like this still considered experimental, or are we getting a real idea now of how people with persistent or serious cases can be treated?
No, we're learning every day, and whilst we started off as pioneers, we know a lot more about how to tackle this, and we're getting better and better at it. So remember, we've got the steroids, then we've got the antiviral drugs, and then we've got the antibodies. So we are getting much, much better compared to 2 years ago.
And what about understanding why some people get the disease more seriously and some get it for longer? Do we have a real understanding of what it is that are the factors in determining that?
No, that's still work in progress, and it is very important to understand that immunology, because some people get that infection, recover, end of story, and some people get that infection, the infection goes, but the immune system carries on overreacting, and then you get this incidence of what we call brain fog, tiredness, and generally being unwell, and then we have to end up suppressing that immune system. So there's a lot to learn, but we're learning, but we haven't cracked it all together.
Very briefly, former Health Secretary during the time of COVID, Matt Hancock, is going on I'm a Celebrity. Quick thought on what you make of that?
I think it's very disappointing because I personally was involved in all this, and I feel, nursing homes, people died. There were these VIP contracts, the failure of PPE, so much. So I feel very disappointed that Matt Hancock seems to have put all those failings behind him and he's off on a new career.
OK, we must leave it there. Dr Bharat Pakmania, very interesting to talk to you this morning. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.